Welcome back to the Podcast de Philippe.
Always a pleasure.
Today we're going deep on some AI-generated scenarios.
Sounds intriguing.
Yeah, it is. We got 4 leading AI programs involved.
Oh, wow. Which ones?
Gemini, ChatGPT, Claude, and de Mistral.
Quite the lineup.
And we gave them quite a prompt to work with.
Well, I'm all ears.
Imagine a world, right, where Trump's back in power in 2025.
Okay, already sounds like a wild ride.
And not just back, but he becomes a dictator.
Oh, wow.
A ceasefire happens in Ukraine.
Interesting.
But Europe feels threatened, so they create their own unified army.
A unified European army, that's a big one.
And just to spice things up, we threw in a U.S.-Europe tech war.
Oh, a tech war, that's fascinating.
Especially focused on AI, with Europe teaming up with Canada to counter U.S. dominance.
So basically a total geopolitical shakeup.
Exactly. And we wanted to see how these AIs would play it out.
I can't wait to hear what they came up with.
Well, ChatGPT went full drama mode, gave us this 4-act play called Twilight of the Empire.
Twilight of the Empire. Dramatic title.
It starts with, you guessed it, Trump consolidating power.
Makes sense.
The U.S. ends up isolated on the world stage.
So a fall from grace.
Pretty much. And that, of course, lets Europe step up, create their own military force.
Filling the power vacuum.
But the real climax is this all-out tech war between the U.S. and Europe.
With China probably watching very closely.
Oh, yeah. ChatGPT doesn't forget about China. They're waiting to capitalize on the whole mess.
Sounds pretty bleak.
It is. It really makes you think about how fragile, democratic institutions can be.
Definitely a sobering thought. So ChatGPT's vision is pretty dark.
Yeah, it is. It's almost like a step-by-step breakdown of how the U.S. could, collapse.
I'm curious, did the other AIs have a similar take?
Well, Claude, it took a different route with its scenario. It's called the Great Fracture.
The Great Fracture? Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, instead of just focusing on the U.S. declining, it looks at the possibility of the U.S., breaking apart from within.
Mm-hmm. The U.S. splitting up? How would that even work?
Well, Claude imagines certain states unhappy with the federal government, they start looking for allies elsewhere.
Looking for allies? Like who?
Potentially Canada and Europe.
So parts of the U.S. aligning with Canada and Europe, that's a very different picture.
It really highlights, I think, the whole anxiety around internal divisions.
Yeah, and how those divisions could reshape, global alliances.
Exactly. Now, Gemini, unfortunately, couldn't play this game.
Oh, why not?
Seems like political predictions are a bit too much for it right now.
So that leaves de Mistral. Did you manage to tackle this?
Yeah.
Mistral. Yeah, that one definitely went all in, gave us this 8-chapter saga called Dawn of Hegemony.
Dawn of Hegemony.
Yeah, loaded with details. And it does echo some themes we've talked about already, Trump coming back, the shaky peace in Ukraine, Europe getting its own army.
Right. But
it dives deeper into tech, specifically AI, and how it shapes this new world order.
It's not just the tech itself, though, right?
Yeah.
de Mistral really digs into the ethics of AI, like how it's developed.
Yeah.
Europe and Canada are portrayed as, the good guys, all about transparency and using AI responsibly.
Which is a stark contrast to, the more authoritarian approach in the U.S.
Yeah.
What really stood out to you in this scenario?
The AI war. That was a wild one.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about it.
de Mistral has Europe and Canada basically scrambling to build their own AI systems.
To counter the U.S., right.
Exactly. It's like tech alliances become as important as military ones in this world.
Makes sense in that kind of future.
And remember how ChatGPT's Twilight of the Empire hinted at China making moves in all the chaos?
Yeah.
Well, both Claude and de Mistral explore that further, but they do it in very different ways.
How so?
In Claude's The Great Fracture, China kind of benefits from the U.S. being distracted with its own problems.
Taking advantage of the situation.
They use the opportunity to expand their influence in Asia, but they're not necessarily the main villain of the story.
So more opportunistic than aggressive.
Yeah. But de Mistral, they give us a much more, I'd say, aggressive China in Dawn of Hegemony.
Okay. How aggressive are we talking?
Eventually, they annex Taiwan, while the U.S. is on the verge of a civil war.
Whoa, that's a major escalation.
It's a world where China looks like it's about to become, the top dog.
This dominant superpower. That's a huge shift.
And I think these contrasting views highlight something really important. These AI scenarios, they're not predictions. Right. They're more like explorations of what could happen based on the data the AI has been trained on.
Yeah, it's up to us to analyze those possibilities and think about what they could mean.
Exactly. And one thing that really struck me in de Mistral scenario was this internal resistance movement that pops up in the U.S.
A resistance movement against Trump's dictatorship.
Yeah, under his rule.
Interesting. So like a rebellion from within.
Le Chat de Mistral imagines this diverse group of people, citizens, journalists, activists, even some from the military.
All banding together.
Yeah, to fight for their freedom.
That's pretty powerful. It speaks to the potential for, resilience, even when things are really bad.
It does. And what's interesting is how they highlight information warfare in this.
Oh, how so?
The resistance uses these underground networks and technology to spread their message.
Yeah, using tech to fight back against an oppressive regime. That's a pretty powerful image.
It makes you think about, what role technology and especially AI would play in a real fight for freedom and democracy.
Yeah. Would it be used to empower people or to control them? That's a huge question.
Especially as we see AI getting more and more integrated into our lives.
Absolutely. It's something we need to be thinking about carefully. But shifting gears a bit, both ChatGPT and Claude touch on a theme that's really relevant right now, the potential for states to fragment.
Right. ChatGPT imagines the U.S. splitting into like 3 separate blocks, China and Russia together, Europe and Canada, and then this weakened U.S.
Yeah, it really emphasizes how the whole global order could, fracture along these ideological or technological lines.
And Claude's The Great Fracture takes a different angle, right? It focuses on individual states within the U.S. breaking away from the federal government.
Almost like a modern-day secession.
Yeah, and I think it reflects those anxieties about political polarization, and the rise of these secessionist movements.
It's a real concern. And it's not just a U.S. phenomenon either. We see similar trends in other parts of the world.
It's important to remember, though, that these scenarios are highly speculative. They're not necessarily predictions of what will happen.
Right. They're more like thought experiments exploring different possibilities.
But they do remind us that the way we organize ourselves politically, the nation-state system, it's not set in stone. It can change.
Absolutely. And things like external pressures, internal divisions, technological advancements, they can all contribute to that transformation.
Speaking of transformation, there's one more interesting theme that came up. The role of Canada.
Oh, yeah. Canada really steps into the spotlight in a lot of these scenarios.
It's not just America's nice neighbor anymore.
Right. It's like Canada becomes this key player on the world stage.
It's fascinating how the AIs position Canada as a crucial ally for Europe, especially as the relationship between the U.S. and Europe breaks down.
Makes sense geographically and politically.
Yeah. In both the Great Fracture and dawn of hegemony, Canada's this vital link, facilitating the flow of resources, technology, even refugees between Europe and a fractured America.
It's almost as if Canada steps up to fill the void left by a declining U.S.,
becoming this champion for democratic values and a leader in ethical AI.
Canada's reputation for stability, its commitment to multilateralism, its growing tech sector, it all positions it really well for a more multipolar world.
So looking back at all these potential futures, how do they connect to what's happening in the world right now?
Well, even though they're fictional, these scenarios highlight some very real trends and anxieties that are shaping our world today. We see rising nationalism, declining trust in institutions, the potential for conflict between major powers.
It's a bit unsettling.
It is, but in a way, these AI-generated scenarios, they hold up a mirror to these anxieties. They force us to confront them.
They also remind us that the future isn't predetermined, right? It's something we actively shape through the choices we make.
Exactly. These scenarios are not predictions. They're invitations for us to think critically about the choices we face, both individually and as a society.
If we're worried about a future where democracy is eroded, global conflict escalates, technology is used for oppression, then we need to start thinking about what we can do to prevent those outcomes.
We have agency. We can make a difference.
Maybe these AI scenarios are a wake-up call, urging us to be more engaged citizens, to stand up for the values we believe in, to demand responsible leadership.
It's a good reminder that the future isn't something that just happens to us. It's something we create.
And that's a thought worth holding on to as we navigate these uncertain times. Well, that brings us to the end of another deep dive on Le Podcast de Philippe. We've explored possible futures, dissected AI predictions, pondered the implications for the present.
If you found this exploration thought-provoking, be sure to subscribe to Le Podcast de Philippe on YouTube to help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers today. Your support helps us keep bringing you these deep dives into fascinating topics.
Until next time, keep those minds curious and engaged.